This is Tante Belle Cose, a podcast about the many beautiful things you can discover in Italy. My name is Danielle O'Terry. I'm a writer and the founder of Feast Travel, Arthur Avenue Food Tours, and Cilento Food Tours. Today I want to discuss some of the common problems, misperceptions, and challenges that you might encounter if you're thinking about an Italy trip. Now, I do trip audits where people send me their itineraries and I review them and make suggestions. And I also do trip consultations where people are really starting from scratch, and we have a 1-hour conversation on Zoom to work out all of the details. So I'm pretty well aware of what people are encountering during their Google searches and then how they're trying to connect all the dots. And the things that they don't know. I mean, why would you know these things unless you're steeped in them like I am? So today I want to talk about a few of those things, because if one person has this question, 1,000 other people have the same question. I'm sure that many of you will find this conversation very useful. And if you do, please share it. This is a new podcast and I'm really trying to get it out there. It's growing in a wonderful way, but of course, we're only on episode 6. So help me out if this helps you out. Okay, so let's start with the most classic, most common challenge/misperception, the Tuscan villa. There is nothing more iconic, nothing more dreamy than the Under the Tuscan Sun villa experience. And there are many villa rental sites. This is something that's been big in the travel market, I would say, at least since the 80s, because there was a time when Tuscany was actually very poor, and a lot of people from abroad, especially the UK, started buying villas, and this specific type of Italian dream started to be realized. Now, there are many villa rental companies that will stock the villa with food, send you a private chef, and have staff that take care of the grounds. And that's great and not cheap. However, Airbnb and VRBO have come around and made the villa experience available to all. But it's not always necessarily what you think it's going to be. So just a blanket disclaimer here. Every family, every traveler is different, and you're going to have different needs or wants. But the important thing is that you start with the definition of what it is you want to get out of your vacation before you fall in love with a beautiful listing on Airbnb. And here's why. Americans are uniquely obsessed with real estate. When we start looking at listings on Airbnb, people see the price, they go into a fantasy world. I'm making a little bit of fun here because also I do not enjoy watching home renovation shows like it seems most Americans do. I know, I guess I'm weird. But the thing is, it's just really easy to feel like you're watching one of those shows versus actually planning your vacation. Especially when you look at the cost and you think, oh, I'm going to split this with all of my friends and family. We're going to live the dream. It's going to be really inexpensive. And this idea that people have in their head about the Tuscan villa can easily turn into something very different. Number one thing, you're going to have to drive everywhere. Literally everywhere. Tuscany is not a brand. It's a region, and it's rural. So when you want to eat, if you want to have lunch, you want to go out for dinner, and you've got 15 people staying in your villa, you're going to need to have multiple cars. And if everybody wants to eat, you're all going to have to go together. And if not, you're going to have to compromise and figure out who's going to have the car back when, who's going to eat what's ever in the fridge. There's going to have to be a lot of negotiation all the time with the people that you're staying with. And, you're also going to have to cook and make your own coffee in the morning, which means you also need to go grocery shopping. And those beautiful farmers markets that you have in your head, they don't happen every day, and you got to figure out which day of the week they actually do happen. I once had a client say to me, I think the worst thing ever would be for me to go to Italy and eat my own rotten cooking. So again, this experience may indeed be a good fit for you, but you're going to have to drive. Also remember that gas is pretty expensive in Italy. I know at home where I have a small SUV, I pay between $30 and $40 normally to fill up my car. In Italy, the same amount of gas is going to cost between 80 and 100 euros. So again, if you're thinking about the overall cost of the villa and it seems pretty cheap versus a hotel, consider how much gas you'll be using and how much traveling you want to do. Now, if your ideal of a vacation is to really sit at the villa, read a book, enjoy the pool and the property, then it's a great idea. But if your ideal of a villa is that it's an inexpensive way for you to position yourself in one place and travel around, it might be 6 of one, half dozen of another as it comes to the price of a hotel. If you really want to do a lot of day tripping, you're better off to stay right inside Florence or Arezzo or Siena or someplace that has a lot of restaurants open in the evening. The other region where the villa experience might really come and bite you is the Amalfi Coast. Because the Amalfi Coast is very expensive, people often go online and find villas available above Positano. But these cliffs are very dramatic, and the driving, if you're not accustomed to it, is crazy. I'm a brave driver. I drive in New York City all the time, and I'm really used to driving in Italy now, and I drive through rural, hilly areas all the time. But you couldn't pay me to drive on the Amalfi Coast. And really, if something seems central on the Amalfi Coast, the quality of the roads or just how narrow they are going to slow you down considerably. A couple of years ago, I stayed in a town called Lettere, where there are lots of hotels and many, many European tourists who are having less expensive Amalfi Coast vacations. They're also doing a lot of driving. On Google Maps, it said it was just 15 minutes to Pompeii, which was a place that I was going for a night tour, and that's why I wanted to stay nearby. But it wasn't 15 minutes. It was 45 minutes because the road getting back and forth to the hotel was dark and steep and dramatic, and the GPS didn't even work half of the way. So it was just really stressful. And the view was absolutely as described. Food was great. And the staff at the hotel was unfazed by the drive. They are completely used to it. So when I arrived with a head full of newly white hair and said that I didn't realize what I was getting into with the roads, they just kind of shrugged. They're used to it. So if you're staying on the Amalfi Coast, you got to be like the Little Mermaid. You got to be where the people are. And that's not going to be cheap. But trust me, it will be so much more worth it. This will be money much more well spent. When you're able to do and see all the things that you want to do versus being stuffed away in nature's curio cabinet way up in Monte Pertuso, you're going to be very happy you did. One exception to this rule, if you really want the villa experience on the Amalfi Coast, would be the hills of Sorrento. You have the Sorrentine Peninsula, and then the actual town of Sorrento, which is at the port. And that's where you find all the hotels and restaurants. And there are lots of villas on the periphery, but especially in the hills of Vico Equense or Piano di Sorrento. These are places where Italians live, and there's actually some fantastic food and local spots where you can really experience the local culture. But yeah, you're going to need to drive, and I think it's very doable if you are comfortable driving. Moving on to challenge number 2. And this is really a challenge for me as a travel advisor. This challenge is called YouTube. Yes, I know you want to look up videos on YouTube, and you should. But YouTube is wild, like most of social media, and people making money on YouTube need to get your attention. And so there is a proliferation of videos designed to scare the crap out of you. I'm talking mainly about the pickpocketing videos. Not too long ago, I was speaking with a good friend of mine about her trip to Rome. We had everything plotted out. At the very last minute, she called me and told me she had purchased some Kevlar-studded walking safe that she was going to have strapped to her forehead because of all the pickpocketing videos that she had watched on YouTube. Listen, pickpocketing? Yeah, it's an issue in every city in the world, and some cities are worse than others. But just use common sense. This should not be something you use to freak yourself out before a vacation. From a city, so perhaps I'm used to having an inordinate amount of attention around my bag, but I really think that if you use common sense, there's no reason to be very afraid. Keep your bag in front of you, make sure your eyes are on it, make sure the pockets are zipped, and you should be fine. It's hard for me to even say which accounts to avoid because there's new stuff going up all the time. But this is what I will say. If something seems excessively fear-mongering, it probably is. I mean, Italy is one of the safest countries in the world that you can travel to. Their crime rate is significantly less than the US. And it's a culture of genuinely nice people. And of course, it's a huge generalization, right? People are people everywhere you go. But it's an essentially hospitable culture. And asking questions, even if you don't know the language, if you're friendly and you're open, is usually going to go pretty well. So don't buy into videos that are fear-mongering in any way. Let me give you one more example. And this one was an especially dramatic one. I had clients who were very, very experienced travelers who sent me a video maybe a day or two before their trip about how Mount Vesuvius was about to erupt and everybody in the world, all the government officials were keeping this silent. This video was very professionally produced. It looked like a news report. And what it was doing was pulling little bits of information that were unrelated and putting them together to make it seem like there was a giant conspiracy going on in Europe that was being silenced, and Mount Vesuvius was about to explode and all of Europe to be destroyed. Well, guess what? Mount Vesuvius and Mount Etna are two of the world's most powerful supervolcanoes, and they're active. But could they go off tomorrow? Sure. There are also volcanoes in the United States and in Mexico and in Iceland. There's no conspiracy cover-up. But this video on YouTube sure made it seem like it was. So YouTube is great, and there's a lot of fantastic content there, but I would say steer yourself towards things that are going to give you information about historical sites versus worrying too much about volcanoes and pickpockets. Look for shows, and maybe some of them will be more professionally produced and just available on YouTube, but things that are going to teach you about the history of the Medici in Florence or the history of ancient Rome. There are lots of great videos that do historical reconstructions of what ancient Rome or Pompeii would have looked like. These are the videos to enjoy in anticipation of your trip. Don't worry about the pickpocket videos. Seriously, you're just going to stress yourself out. Look forward to a great trip and know that you'll just use common sense. This may be my most controversial statement of this podcast. August is a fantastic month to travel to Italy. I know, right? Crazy. What are you talking about? August is terrible. It's hot. It's crowded. The flights are expensive. All the Italians leave the city. Danielle, you're nuts. I'm turning this off. Believe me, August is an amazing month to travel. It's not an amazing month to go to Florence, Venice, or Rome, because yes, all of the above are true. It's hot. It's empty of Italians. It's full of tourists. And mostly only the tourist trap restaurants are left serving. But it's an amazing, fantastic, beautiful month, an opportunity really, to experience authentic Italy in rural places. Italy is full of regions that have beautiful mountaintop villages, which are pretty quiet during most of the year, but that come alive in the summertime. Many of the sagre, the food festivals that people read about, really happen in the summer. People tend to think that they happen in the fall, and there definitely are. There are chestnut festivals and ones related to wine. But the best ones happen in August. And that's because so many people who left their small hometown in Abruzzo or Calabria that live in Rome or Milan now, well, they're home for the summer. They're visiting family, they're at the summer house that the family has had for generations, and there are lots of celebrations of the harvest that are also homecomings. One of the best places you can go during the summer months in the Cilento National Park is my favorite town called Trentinara. It's very close to where I stay when I'm in Capaccio, where my family has a beautiful small resort. But Trentinara in particular is also deeply attached to its peasant roots and its agrarian traditions. And every August, they hold a sagra called the Palio del Grano. And they do historical reenactments of how people would harvest the wheat, and they bring in the wheat, and then there's a food festival in town with all of these little stands around the historic center of the village. And many of the foods are even described with their dialect names, and really it's an adventure. And then again, you're still not far from the beach, but you're in the hills where there's a nice breeze and no mosquitoes, and you're in the hum of real Italian life. Everything is open, everyone is out, and everybody is up late, including kids. It is so much fun. If you go back and listen to episode 2, the story about the Panarda in the Abruzzo that takes place in the town of Villa Vallelonga, they have a summer festival in addition to the winter one that we talk about in the episode. And it's also a food festival as well as a giant homecoming. These are the best ways to experience real Italy. And I know you're coming from across the ocean, so it seems hard to plan a trip that's going to only include these little small towns and not the big sites like the Colosseum. So this is what I would say. If you're flying into Rome, book tickets to go see those sites that are really important to you. And yeah, it's going to be hot, and maybe you're not going to have the best restaurant experience in the world. But make it an anchor of your trip, and then also choose some small towns. If you want to visit the coast, go to Calabria, Campania, Abruzzo, even parts of Tuscany. And yeah, airfare is going to be much more expensive. But if you do stay in those smaller towns, you will be shocked by how reasonable the accommodations are and how good the food is. I mean, seriously, you can have food in these small towns that's like 10 times better than anything you'll ever have in Florence, Venice, or Rome. And I'm not kidding. We'll talk about that in a future episode. If you're more of a mountains and lakes person, you could go to Lake Orta or Lake Garda. If you like wine, go to Irpinia, the mountains just north of the Amalfi coast. And you will be around real Italians, real Italian families who are happy that you're there and are happy to bring you into their experience of life. August is the month when Italians celebrate Ferragosto, and the highlight of this vacation week is August 15th. And this is the feast of the Assumption of the Virgin Mary. It's a big event. You'll find processions and special dinners or lunches in celebration of it. If you're on the coast, you may see a procession where a statue of the Virgin Mary is brought out on a boat to sea early in the morning. And then at sunrise, everyone gathers on the beach and there are candles and flowers and singing. And these are beautiful historical experiences, a way to experience living history outside of an archaeological site or a museum or a church. And if you are near one of these experiences, wake up early, walk in the procession, be at the beach in the morning when these things happen, because I promise you, they will be unforgettable. Here's something that's not going to change anytime soon. The cruise industry is booming. And I'm not here to bash cruises. We can have a drink and talk about that some other time. However, the reason I bring this up is that the places where cruises come in are not going to get any less. In fact, I anticipate that places like the Cinque Terre are going to get much, much worse. Now, there are conversations happening within the Italian government about sustainable tourism and about how the land of the Cinque Terre itself is being crushed. But it's not going to slow down. I don't know how the economics of these things work, but local government is always very slow to act. So if you don't like crowds, places like the Cinque Terre need to come off of your list. You will find cruise groups in the big cities as well. In Naples, they come directly into the city, but usually they get on buses and go directly to Pompeii, or they get on ferries to go to Capri, which is why that island is so excessively crowded. In Rome, most people will be going to the big sites, the Vatican and the Colosseum. In Pompeii, you can avoid these crowds by going late in the afternoon. The archaeological park is open till sunset and very uncrowded in the afternoon, actually pleasant. Now, Venice has stopped cruises from going down the Grand Canal, but they do still come into port in the morning. So if you've just got a few hours in Venice, you're going to do what everybody's doing, right? You're going to try to get on a water taxi to go down the Grand Canal and take a picture on the Rialto Bridge and Piazza San Marco. So if you want to avoid the crowds in Venice, it's pretty easy. Just don't go anywhere near San Marco or the Rialto Bridge before 3 o'clock when the cruisers start to leave. And for the Cinque Terre, you can look at the cruise schedule. Cruisedig.com is one of the sites. It's got a lot of pop-ups and it might slow down your computer, but you'll figure it out. And if you look at the port of La Spezia, you can see exactly how many cruisers will be in port that day. On some day, there were like 12,000, and then others, there are 300. So if you're strategic about it, you might be able to make it work. Taormina in Sicily, home of the White Lotus, is of course another major cruise port. Sicily in general is not inundated by cruise ships, but little tiny Taormina is. And it's a pretty town, but it's often unbearable during the day because of how many day trippers are there. So once again, if you're in eastern Sicily, go to Taormina in the evening and just know that there are so many other towns in Sicily that you could visit and can have a fantastic experience. It doesn't have to be Taormina. Cruise packages are really popular. They're affordable, and when people are looking at the entire package, it often makes sense to them. They're also often not looking at the excursions, the Wi-Fi, all the extras that get added in later. But nonetheless, the boomer population is getting older, and they are more and more often now opting for cruises. So if that's not your jam, you need to look elsewhere. But the good news is that there are plenty of alternatives, and if you really do want to see Florence, Venice, and Rome, because why wouldn't you? Do try to see these places in the off-season. If you can go in November or February, you will have an amazing time. You can eat at great restaurants, get into the museums without waiting in crazy lines. You go to the Amalfi Coast for the weather. You don't go to Florence for the weather. So go in the middle of February and make it a good excuse to buy a cashmere sweater and nice boots, because there's great shopping in Florence, and spend a lot of time in museums and going to great restaurants without the crowds. The last thing I would like to discuss is only going to be relevant to the early bird planners. And this is for those people who are looking at rates for next year and are afraid that everything is already sold out. This year, a lot of people are planning ahead because of the Jubilee that's happening in Rome. It's a papal Jubilee that happens once every 25 years. So yes, there are going to be a lot of visitors to Rome. But many hotels Honestly, most hotels have not yet published their 2025 rates. The chain hotels do, the Marriotts and the Hiltons. The hotels that work with the big bus tours, they have their rates set. And that's because they have corporate headquarters with accountants who have already projected their margins for the next 5 years. But the smaller hotels, the ones that are locally owned or family run, are still busy taking care of their guests. They've been working their butts off all season. Now, around November 1st, things start to quiet down. And in many locations, especially along the coast or in the mountains like the Dolomites or in Sicily, everybody takes a break, a very well-earned break. And then maybe they go on vacation for a couple of weeks. And when they come back and they start preparing to reopen for the holiday season, they also meet with their commercialista, which is their accountant. And that's usually when they start to figure out what their rates are going to be, and they get an honest assessment of what their expenses have been during the past season. Energy costs fluctuate quite a bit, so different conditions every year make the income sometimes difficult to predict. This is all to say, the commercialista has not yet given them their suggestions, and certainly none of this has been put online, usually until the holiday season. So if you're looking at a destination and you're like, oh my goodness, everything is sold out, how can this be? It's probably not yet sold out. The rates just aren't live yet. Now, if you're really eager to book, which you can do, Italians are phone people. Call them, or you can send them an email and let them know when you would like to stay. And very often you can reserve at the rate that's current instead of whatever is going to change. And that will usually require a small non-refundable deposit, but it may very well be worth it. I hope you have found this episode useful and helpful, because I hear questions from people all the time, and people are usually afraid that they're asking stupid questions, but really, don't worry about that. Ask any questions you have, especially if you are in our subscriber community. Now, I do provide individual trip audits, as I mentioned before, as well as more in-depth trip consultations. But if you've self-planned a trip and you just have a bunch of random questions, you want to know where to go to dinner one night in Rome, join our subscriber community. It's a growing community, small, but we're only on episode 6, and I will answer any of your questions in those subscriber-only chat threads. I will tell you who the best tour guides are, I will tell you which restaurants I like, and if you've got a few different ideas that you're batting around and you want to know which one is the best, just plop it in the chat and I am more than happy to answer. Now, as this community grows, I hope it will also become more collaborative. There are lots of Facebook groups out there where you can do this, but honestly, the information in those things is often terrible. And moderators, no matter how well-meaning, can only keep up so much with how many comments are being traded there all of the time. And my intention is to keep this a relatively small community so that I can always keep a close eye on it. It's really a top priority for me, especially as I'm now moving into a quieter season. Most of my guests traveling in Italy are coming to the end of their trips, and throughout November, December, January, and February in particular, I'm going to be giving a lot of attention to my subscriber community. Thank you so much for listening. If you've enjoyed this, please subscribe, please share. If you're listening on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, hit the button with all the stars, maybe leave a little review. These little things make an enormous difference to somebody like me who's trying to get their podcast out there. So thank you. I appreciate you listening, and I'll talk to you next week.